Good morning, Waterdown. I hope you're having a great day. This video is about something I don't know much about, and that is hockey. Now, all of you know infinitely more about hockey than I do, how to play it, all that stuff, but you can't really talk about Canadian history, can you? Unless you talk about hockey. And of course, I know that this is a hockey stick, but did you know that our history, our Canadian identity is wrapped up in the game of hockey? And so you know that in the 1920s we talked about the CBC. And really the one show that tied people from coast to coast, as you know, was Hockey Night in Canada, which was on Saturday night on CBC. Everyone watched it.
And from that era, one of the most famous hockey announcers was Foster Hewitt. He would go on to coin the phrase, "He shoots, he scores." Originally, he called Leaf games, but for 30 years, he became the voice of the Leafs and the NHL.
But also, did you know about this guy? So Sam Shapiro was an airman who was shot down over Germany and taken prisoner, and he was put in one of the most famous camps, and these are prisoner of war camps throughout Germany. It is Stalag Luft 3. And Stalag Luft 3 had mostly British and Canadian airmen. Well, they were there to sit out the war, and they couldn't go anywhere. But instead of sitting around and just doing nothing, they actually dug tunnels, and they actually had one of the great escape, or the biggest escapes out of a prisoner of war camp. And they dug under, and they got to the forest. They made their own passports. They made their own uniforms. It's made into a movie. It's very, very famous. But one of the people that dug the tunnel, his name was Sam Shapiro. And Sam Shapiro was Canadian, as I said, from West Isle, Ontario. And he was upset that they didn't have any hockey equipment. So he wrote the Red Cross, and the Red Cross sent him sticks, skates, and pucks, and he actually set up the first hockey games in World War II in prisoner of war camps. In the 1950s, there was a very, very famous Canadian. This guy's name is Maurice Rocket Richard, and he played for, of course, the most winning franchise in NHL history, the Montreal Canadiens. The Montreal Canadiens, of course, had this guy. He was their star player, but he had a fiery temper. And one time he didn't like a call, and he, in fact, punched, that's right, punched a referee. Well, the NHL suspended him. But they felt, a lot of people felt, separatists felt, that he was unjustly punished. You see, the English were treating the French unfairly. And so there proceeded what's called the Richard riots. And some people say that the Richard riots are actually the precursor to the Quiet Revolution, or the precursor to the separatist movement. Who knows? From the Habs, of course, to the Leafs, a lot of people are wondering when they're going to win the next Stanley Cup. I hope it's soon as well. The last time they won was 1967. That was the last time the Leafs won the Stanley Cup. I'm old, and it was before I was born. That's how long it has been, ladies and gentlemen. But, of course, the Leafs are also part of our Canadian culture and our Canadian fabric. And there is a great band, one of the greatest Canadian bands ever, called the Tragically Hip. And they wrote a song, they sang a song called 50 Mission Cap. And 50 Mission Cap is about the legend of Leafs great Bill Barilko. And Bill Barilko, of course, won the Leafs the Cup in 1951. He shot the winning goal. He had been a hero. And after that, in the summer months, he went on a fishing trip to Quebec in Northern Ontario. Well, his plane went down and was lost. And the Leafs did not win another Stanley Cup until 1962, and that was the year his body was discovered. So people think, a lot of Canadians think there is like a Canadian curse or a Bill Barilko hockey curse on the Leafs. I don't know, but anyways, it's a great song, and it's a great Canadian story. You really can't talk about hockey and history without talking about the 1972 Summit Series. I already mentioned that one in my 70s videos, but I wanted to save it for this video because really it's when Cold War meets hockey. And for years and years and years, people were saying the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union had an incredible team, were better than Canada. Well, Canada, of course, had to prove that they were the best. So they took their best NHL stars and they went against the Soviet Union in 1972 in what would be an 8-game series. Well, everyone expected the Canadians to beat these Russians, but the Russians were in tremendous shape. And the Canadians, although they did have some wins, it was a heavy go. And of course, sometimes they got beat badly. 4 games here in Canada and 4 games in Russia. The thing is, it became a war. It became a Cold War battle. And if you talk or you see a great special on Netflix called Cold War on Ice, I want you to check it out. They talk about it not being a game, but being a war. One of the things that happened is that when they went to Moscow to play these games, they got phone calls at all hours of the night, right, to wake them up. Who was calling them? Just to keep them off their game. They lost some of the Canadian equipment. In a legend, and I get this from a good friend, Mr. Christie, who tells me about the great Canadian legend about Frank Mahovlich, who was a part of the Canadian team, and he looked on the ground of his hotel room, and he saw what he thought was a bug or a listening device listening in on the Canadian team. He was so freaked out about it that he unscrewed it.
Well, as it turns out, it was actually a nut holding a bolt that was supporting a light in the room below.
Of course, when he unscrewed it, it crashed down. That's a great legend. Whether it's true or not, I'm not 100% sure, but it makes a great story. But I do know one of the most controversial moments is when we scored a goal in Moscow, and that little red light on the net, it didn't go off. Someone had tampered with it. So, of course, the whole bench goes ballistic. A guy called Alan Eagleson, who has since, of course, fallen from hockey grace, he got on the ice and started giving the finger to the refs and just losing it. Well, the Secret Service, the KGB, the military police, I don't know who they were, they actually went and got Alan Eagleson. They're going to take him away. And of course, the Canadian team had to skate over and steal him back. Can you imagine? In just a regular series hockey play. I mean, it was just craziness. In the end, of course, it is all a part of Canadian history. It's in your textbooks. The great Paul Henderson scored the winning goal, and we won the series. And of course, we kept our domination for hockey.
But I would like to end with something I think is one of the most important aspects of hockey, is women's hockey. Women's hockey is the fastest growing sport in the world. When I was a kid, women's hockey was almost non-existent in Southern Ontario, but now it is flourishing. The first female actually to be photographed playing hockey was Lord Stanley's daughter, Isabel. Look at some of these early teams. They had to wear skirts, like the Edmonton Swastikas. Okay, next slide, please. Things internationally really revved up in Nagano in 1998, when we, the men's team, didn't even get bronze. However, the women's team got a silver. After that, they had 4 consecutive gold medals at the Olympics. One of the undisputed heroes of women's hockey is Hayley Wickenheiser. And as a child, growing up in a small town, people resisted having a girl in the boys' locker room. However, people would say, she said, girls don't play hockey, girls don't skate. And I would say, watch this. And Canadians, did we ever watch her. Have a great day, Waterdown.